In this video, I'm going to give you my tips and my rating as to whether or not you should buy Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a very big game, and the question is it a worthy successor for players of Ghost of Tsushima or Assassin's Creed Odyssey, or is it a great game when compared to The Witcher 3? And before I address that, I do think that it is a game that a lot of players that like open world RPGs of this type will be interested in. Will it hold their interest for the dozens, if not hundreds of hours it takes to complete the main story? That remains to be seen. Assassin's Creed Valhalla has an interesting combat system where you dual wield two weapons. You have an adrenaline bar which affects your abilities, and you have a stamina system. Well, the issue is that the stamina system is so unforgiving that the incentives to actually dodge attacks are fairly low, that you probably just want to conserve your stamina in most cases, because the penalties for depleting your stamina bar are so high. So in games like Ghost of Tsushima with no stamina bar, or even in The Witcher 3, dodging, which had no stamina cost, dodging is really a dangerous activity, because if your stamina bar goes down to zero, Eivor can't protect him or herself. The adrenaline bars, which you can build up to 4 based on the allocation of your skill points as you progress through the game, are far more important, and the abilities are typically fairly overpowering. So the use of the abilities is probably much more important than the use of dodging or rolling, and maybe more important than even what weapon you tend to wield. The armor and swords and all axes and all other weapons, hammers, etc., are all upgradable, but the costs of upgrading them are actually quite high, and unless you're very active farming things like carbon, nickel, tungsten, and more importantly titanium, you'll find it hard to upgrade all your weapons. Each weapon item you find is unique to the game. It's totally upgradable. You can keep it for the whole time. So the incentive really is to stick with one weapon. I played almost exclusively with spears. I started doing that mostly to exploit the fishing exploits, but they do have a longer range, and so they may give you some advantage there. But you can really choose whatever weapon you want, including daggers, and there are pros and cons for all of them. You should understand that your second wielded weapon is not very effective, so it does less damage as a second wield. And that's why I preferred the shield in that slot, so you would get some passive protection and not have to use that much, but you could use it to block, or you could use it as an attack too. So, but it's really up to the player, and I don't think that any play style is necessarily so OP or so poor that you would not be able to finish the game. Whereas if you talk about Ghost of Tsushima or The Witcher 3, there were some choices in the way that you play the game that it would make it much harder to complete. So for instance, the ghost weapons were so OP in Ghost of Tsushima, and in The Witcher 3 it was very important that you had a swords build if you're playing on the hardest difficulty, if you had a swords alchemy build, because the skills in The Witcher 3 at least were based on percentages and not additive, and so the amount of damage you're doing by the end of the game, and I think this is also true of Odyssey, was a huge number compared to what you were doing at the beginning of the game, whereas it's more like 3 to 4 times, 5 times the damage you do at the end of the game versus the beginning of the game, because all the skills are additive, right? And they add to your damage, but they don't multiply your damage. And so the good thing is that the enemies are not as much of damage sponges as they reportedly were in Odyssey, or definitely in The Witcher 3. And the enemies are more similar to Ghost of Tsushima. You can also assassinate any level enemy with a timed assassination skill, and that allows you to not have the problem of going to a high level area and you can't do any damage whatsoever. That being said, I found that it was kind of hard, even with kind of low levels of stealth recognition, to really stealth your way through a mission that you could do a little bit of stealth, but then eventually you'd end up getting into a melee battle in the open. And so it was not possible in the way that Ghost of Tsushima was possible, that you could be an assassin the whole time. And indeed, I don't think there was any mission within Assassin's Creed Valhalla that it forced stealth on you, whereas there were some in Ghost of Tsushima. So overall, I would say that the combat in Assassin's Creed Valhalla is good, but it's not great. I'd give it a B+, and I'd give the combat an A in Ghost of Tsushima, and maybe I'd give a similar B+ rating to The Witcher 3, but it's not really truly the combat, but rather the preparation that is interesting in The Witcher 3, whereas there's not a lot of preparation that you really need to do. Fill up your rations, fill up your quiver. That's kind of the preparation that you have for battle and a new mission in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Okay, in terms of the story, I found the story was interesting. It was good. I thought it was okay. In some ways, I enjoyed the story of Assassin's Creed Valhalla better than Ghost of Tsushima. It was just my issue with the story in Assassin's Creed Valhalla is that the timing of it was a little bit slow. That there was too little of it dribbled out over time, and there was excessive numbers of arcs. So I think there's just under 20 arcs, maybe in the range of like 17 different story arcs, and each one has separate chapters. So it has 3, 4, 5, 6 missions within each arc, and it just kind of weared on you after a while. It just got, and I thought there were some that were quite good, and they were all different. They weren't all cookie cutter, and so that is something that I think should be commended, right? It wasn't, maybe the actual mission themselves were a little cut and paste, but they were not just pure objective things. There was stories, there was cutscenes, there were new characters, and so I think that should be commended. It just, after a while, it got a little bit old, right? And so I never felt like the story in The Witcher 3 got old. It had 3 acts. They were long acts. It was a long game, but they had some punch, and they had some relevance, and they had an overarching theme. But when you have 17 different ones, it's kind of hard for an overarching theme. Ghost of Tsushima was so short that its stories, even though there wasn't a lot of content in them, and there was no choice within them, it was still had more impact because it was shorter and it came together more quickly before you really kind of lost interest in the game. So it was a bit of a grind to get, from like power level 190 to power level 270 story arcs, right? Even though there were some really good story arcs in that part of the story, they were not cut and paste story arcs. I think the Wicker Man, for example, story arc was quite good, even though there was the glitch of the mask that Eivor kept on wearing until you finished the arc. But it was a really well done arc, I thought, in terms of the story. And so I guess I just think there was just too much in Assassin's Creed Valhalla relative to what was the overarching theme. And the other thing is, I don't think most players who played through it had enough guidance about when to do the Asgard and Jotunheim story arc. So you need to get your settlement to level 3 to start playing the Asgard arc. And I think the Asgard arc is probably, the one of the most important story arcs in the game, as is the Jotunheim story arc. And it's not a spoiler to say that for people that are familiar with the Assassin's Creed series, that there was this race of humanoid-type creatures 75,000 years ago called the Isu, who ruled the world, and they were wiped out by a cataclysm, right? And the Isu storyline, which kind of runs through all these Assassin's Creed games, that's really important. And to understand the Isu background or the backstory for this game, you really need to play the Asgard and Jotunheim story arcs. But you could easily miss them. And I think, so I would recommend if you do play it around level 90, you should play the Asgard story arc. And around a level 120, you should play the Jotunheim story arc. And then don't go back to Asgard until after you complete Eivor's story arc, which is about a power level 270. And then go back and you will have a big boss fight, which was a very high level, maybe the highest level boss there is. But I went back when I was like power level 200 or something, not realizing that I was not supposed to go back until power level 330. And so that was kind of, or 350 or something ridiculous. So that would, if you're on the hardest difficulty levels and you maybe don't have the absolute best gear, when you do that could be very, very difficult. And you might have to go back to an earlier save to just avoid that boss fight when you're better able. So I think, and Asgard was really the only one that didn't make the power level obvious. But I would say for story, I'd give them an A-. Pacing was the principal problem with the story. It wasn't the depth of it, right? And I think I'd give a B or maybe even a C for the story for Ghost of Tsushima. Pacing was not a problem there. And of course, I'd give an A to The Witcher 3 to give you an idea of which ones I think have kind of stronger story. And then in terms of choice, I thought there was a moderate amount of choice, but it was not really a branching narrative, right, that you'd go down one hole of the narrative. Instead, they had a system that was really similar to the system with Ciri in The Witcher 3, that you had strikes. You get so many strikes out of 5. I think if you got 3 strikes out of 5, then you would get the bad ending for Eivor. But the bad ending is not terrible, but it's not ideal either. Similar in The Witcher 3, if you made three bad decisions out of 5, you would get the ending where your relationship with Ciri would not be ideal. But there really isn't a branching narrative. There were some, and I think that the dialogue choices pretty much did not matter in most cases, besides those 5 select choices. I'm not going to go through those right now because I don't want to make this too spoilery, but you can check out a lot of videos about that if you're interested, and see if you have a chance of getting the, quote, good ending. There was no player choice for the present day ending, right? So there's a present day where Layla's in the Animus, and there's 800 AD where she's playing Eivor. And there's no good or bad ending. There's no choice in the Layla arc. So I think that's kind of a strike against it, right? And so, I think that in terms of player choice, I give it a B, and maybe I'd give a D to Ghost of Tsushima as a point of reference, and then an A for The Witcher 3. The last thing I want to talk about is, should you buy the premium editions? And I'll just say, no, you shouldn't. So one of the criticisms of the game is that Ubisoft Connect is kind of ubiquitous, and so they're trying to upsell you on armor sets and stuff. And those are totally unnecessary or cosmetic items. I did get the Platinum Edition, which came with a wolf mount and extra armor set, the Berserker armor set. I actually really liked the helmet for the Berserker armor set. It was the only helmet in the game where you could see Eivor's face, and so that was why I liked that, because I wanted to see Eivor's face in the cutscenes. So it was more a cosmetic thing. Although I think the rest of the set is no good, but you can buy that at the Ubisoft store for probably a big discount compared to what I paid for the Platinum Edition, right? So and I'm sure you could buy the wolf mount. Now, most of the things in the Ubisoft Connect store probably will eventually come up in the Retta store, which is introduced into the game, where you do assassination contracts principally, or freeing prisoners for opal, and they're really short contracts, and you get 5 to 20 opal depending whether it's a weekly or a daily. And so 120 opal is about to buy one piece of armor or one weapon, right? Which would show up in the Ubisoft Connect store. So what I'm trying to say is that the Berserker helm, for instance, came up in the Retta shop at one point, right? So now if you paid them extra, then you could use that right away, or if you paid for the Platinum Edition, you use that right away. The Platinum Edition also came with a season pass for the DLC, and they're going to have huge DLCs for Ireland and Paris, and I will play those eventually, but I'm glad that they're not available now, because I'm kind of overwhelmed. I'm glad that I'm done with the main quest, and I'm not sure that I want to do another story arc right now. But I think you're better off, you'll be money ahead if you just buy the things that you want at the Ubisoft Connect store, and then you get the regular edition, which is going for about $40 the time I'm recording it. It'd probably be going for less by the time you do, and then get the season pass when it comes out. There is I think there was like the Way of the Berserker mission, and then there's also there's the Beowulf. And the Beowulf mission was pretty good, and it was kind of a story arc in itself. But is it necessary? No. But it was interesting. It was one of the better story arcs, the Way of Beowulf. And so I consider the Platinum Edition as kind of a tip jar for Ubisoft, that I was glad they came out with such a good game, and I still do think it's a good game. But is it a waste of money? Yeah, it is kind of a waste of money. You don't need to do that. You could get into this game for $40 easily, and all the armor sets and everything else, those are not necessary. There's way too many armor sets in the game as it is, and so in terms of cosmetics or in terms of stats, there's absolutely no reason to do that. It is more cosmetics than anything, right? To have a wolf mount, right? Which you can buy one-off for cheaper than the Platinum Edition. So overall, I would give this game I would rate Assassin's Creed Valhalla, a B+. Probably would give Ghost of Tsushima an A-, and The Witcher 3 an A as a point of reference. So I think it's a good game. It's it's better than replaying Ghost of Tsushima for sure, right? Or replaying The Witcher 3 for the 7th time. There is no shortage of content in the base game, and you can have hours and hours of entertainment for not that much money. So it's a good value. You should buy it if this is the type of game that you like. I'm Linus Wilson. Subscribe.